Why does Israel need to be one of the worst countries in the world or in the developed world when it comes to regulations? And the least regulated economy in the world is Hong Kong, which up until 4 or 5 years ago was, actually still is, maybe the richest country in the world, extremely free, a very attractive immigration destination. Yeah, if they can do it, why can't us? That's why banks in Israel are extremely inefficient, because competition is so, almost doesn't exist. And when you speak about competition with other countries, startups in Israel find it extremely hard to raise money and move it into Israel and put it and deposit in their banking account.
Before we begin, I want to talk about IsraelTech's partner, HaGesher Group. HaGesher Group helps Israeli tech companies looking to recruit in the United States. If you're an Israeli tech company aiming to recruit top talent and need support on the ground in America, HaGesher Group can help you quickly grow. HaGesher Group is your trusted partner to help you navigate the US market and accelerate growth. For more information on IsraelTech's partner, HaGesher Group, you can go to HaGesherGroup.com. And now, back to the show.
Welcome to another episode of Israel Tech. I have a good friend of mine, Gilad Alper. Gilad, how you doing?
I'm okay, how are you?
I'm good. So you're probably the only guest that I've ever had that's actually been to my house.
Really?
Yeah, that's been on Israel Tech. I don't know. We'll uncover. We'll let the audience decide in the comments if it was a mistake, if he should be invited back. But actually, even though we're not going to talk about politics at all, you're an economist, and it was when you were involved in politics to help liberate Israel's economy. And for those that don't know, you're head of the Israel Freedom Party now, right? So maybe even though we're not going to really talk about politics, we're going to talk about economics when it has to do with the Israeli tech ecosystem. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what is the Freedom Party?
It's a libertarian party, so we endorse capitalistic reforms in Israel. We want to deregulate the economy, free imports, cut the budget, and stuff like that. So basically, turn the political regime in Israel into something that's closer to Switzerland, for example, or Hong Kong or Singapore. And
formerly Hong Kong.
Well, formerly Hong Kong. I mean, even now it's still a very attractive state, although obviously not as much as it was 5 years ago. But yeah, my aim is basically to turn Israel a lot richer and the Israeli citizens a lot freer by embracing libertarian policies.
And in short, what are libertarian policies?
Basically freedom. I mean, that's the one word that kind of summarizes everything. As little central planning as possible, as little interference from politicians and regulators as possible. Specifically, it means to deregulate the economy, no more limitations and tariffs, and the budget needs to be a lot smaller so that taxes can come down. Just basic stuff that you can find in every successful capitalistic country.
So we'll get into all that, but let's focus a little bit first on the tech ecosystem and maybe we'll go to the economy at large. I hear a lot of people when I talk about, Israel's success in the tech ecosystem, they'll say, there's a great partnership between entrepreneurship and capitalism and the universities and the army and the government supporting them.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on people that say that?
No, I think that the reason that the tech industry has been doing so well in Israel is mostly because it's unregulated and because the state almost doesn't interfere with it at all. Yeah, of course, there's some positive feedback loop that comes from what the army needs and what the army asks from, in terms of the demand that comes from the security part of the Israeli economy, yeah, that's positive. But the reason really the sector has been doing so well, unlike other sectors in the Israeli economy, is because we don't have almost any regulations in the Israeli tech industry. Companies basically hire whoever they want to hire. They are not protected by competition. They can sell to whoever they choose. They can decide on prices, obviously, whatever the market can bear. But there's almost no involvement from the state. And of course, we had the immigration from Russia that created a lot of supply of great engineers. And, luckily for Israel, the tech industry globally just took off. So demand was there, and I hope it's going to continue to be there. But still, if you want to find the one differentiating factor between tech and everything else in Israel is just the degree of interference from politicians.
Would you say that's also true in America too, right? Because they're saying overwhelmingly the tech ecosystem industry is not regulated.
Yeah.
And that's why they've been so successful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can say that almost about any sector, right? Almost any sector in any state or any country where the state doesn't intervene, you're probably going to get better returns, better quality products, lower prices, more prosperity, employment at higher wages. It's going to happen in everything that you do. Tech maybe stands out because tech has become such a big sector, globally over the past 30, 40 years. And because it's so global, and because the supply chain in tech is so global and so complicated, and then of course you have people like Elon Musk, going in and making tech even more attractive and interesting and innovative, and so on and so forth. But basically, everything that you do, that you keep, that you maintain in the confines of the private market without politicians, always looks better and more prosperous.
Mm-hmm. So one of the interesting things I've learned several months ago is that the 40 biggest companies in the European Union are all 40 years old.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. The entire internet and tech, I think the highest one is Spotify, number 58.
Yeah. So the European model is horrible, and I think we're going to see that more and more over the next few years, although admittedly it's a little bit tough to separate all of the damage that's happening in Europe, from the economy and politics and immigration and the changing social norms in Europe, so it's a little bit hard to say. But yeah, if you look at Europe overall, innovation is very poor, central planning is rampant. Everyone that's, good engineers move to other places, mainly the US and to a lesser extent, the Far East. So the European model is failing, and it's going to fail, I think, a lot more over the next few years. And one of the reasons is, the limitations Europeans put on economy overall, on economic activity, on innovation, and you can see it in the fines that are now levying, over the past few years, been levying on American tech companies. And this entire attitude of looking at what companies do and try to analyze, are they being fair or non-fair, and then trying to fine them heavily when you come to the conclusion that they're not being fair, is a horrible way to go about, managing your economy, because obviously you're deterring entrepreneurs, you're deterring companies from employing, wherever you have this regime, and it's simply impossible for regulators and politicians. It's almost impossible to decide if whatever companies do is fair or unfair. I mean, it's almost impossible to understand if a company like Google, it's a very large company, they have the search engine, they have YouTube, they have digital advertisements, and they have been, very successful over the past 20 years. Whatever Google does, are they doing it because they're being unfair, or are they doing it because they're so successful? I mean, are you penalizing them because they're being unfair or because they're being successful? And as you penalize companies for being successful, you're going to have less and less entrepreneurs trying to build companies within the territories where you have those type of policies. So Europeans are obviously shooting their own foot.
Right, they say America innovates, Europe regulates, and China imitates.
Yeah, China imitates well, to an extent. It is a very interesting question how much innovation you can really have in a country, in a regime that is, nearly fascistic, which is the case in China, and is increasingly the case in Europe. That's going to be very interesting to see in the future when China, has to move away from imitating and stealing to actually developing on their own.
Do they need to? I mean, they're communists. They don't really seem to care to. And it seems like when anyone like Jack Ma or whoever, they kind of disappear, right? They fall off the radar. Even he made a comment about regulation, financial regulation, and the Communist Party basically took him and his family away. He came missing, and So really, there's no room for that.
Yeah, so China definitely is going through some interesting phases. They used to be completely...
That's an interesting word, interesting. For China.
Yeah. They used to be obviously completely communistic, and then they started to open up the economy, and that brought them an amazing boom. I mean, 500 million people basically moved from being dirt poor to being middle class, or nearly middle class. But I guess at some stage, the regime or the government or, whatever, the dictators of China, I guess at some stage decided that maybe entrepreneurs that are becoming too rich are becoming too much of a risk.
Right, that's how they see it. It's a risk to the regime.
Yeah, and then
they fear an Elon Musk or a leader person in tech or an entrepreneur or Jack Ma that people may look at and admire more than the Communist Party.
Yeah, so they're clamping down, and that's going, I think, to bite them in the backside at some stage, and possibly it's happening already now, given how poor the economy in China is doing. But talking about China and talking about them being scared of people like Jack Ma, I mean, look at what's happening in the US. Look at how politicians from the Democratic Party have been speaking about Elon Musk over the past few weeks. They threatened to nationalize his companies, cancel all of the government contracts, jailing him, deporting him. And all of that because he's supporting politicians they don't like.
Right.
So China doesn't hold a monopoly on being anti-freedom. I hope, we're taking this on, what is it now, November 7th? So 2 days after Trump won in a very, very big way in the US. I hope he's going to put them on the right path. But my point is that you always need to worry, whether you're in China or in the US or in Europe, that the regime is going to develop in ways that are going to be detrimental to prosperity and freedom.
So let's bring it back home. When it comes to the Israeli tech ecosystem, like you were saying earlier, it's not regulated, or minimally regulated, at least compared to the other industries.
Correct.
Let's talk about regulation of other industries, and we'll get back into tech for a minute. What is it about, there's a lack of, I find, as an American that moved here, probably the hardest thing is having to deal with the terrible customer service you get from the banks. So we're talking private sector, where there's competition. We can talk about that. And then also, of course, Americans complaining about it in America too, the DMV, any kind of government office you need to go, and then Bituach Leumi and all that. I actually find them easier here than there, to be honest. And so I was wondering, what industries, can you give it an example that's regulated? And if we were to deregulate it, we'll see it boom similar to the tech industry.
Well, I just read 2 days ago in a post, I think in either Facebook or X, about a cosmetician telling about how she's trying to import a machine that does nails or something. And Israel, the customs agencies, the Institute of Standards, whatever you want to call them, are blocking the imports because they want to check the machine she's importing, because they've decided that it, having already an European badge of approval isn't enough for Israel. Maybe because, I don't know, Jewish nails need different care than European nails or whatever other stupid excuse they've invented. And
who's they?
The Institute of Standards.
Why? What's in it for them?
Oh, okay. So why do you have regulations in general at all? So
how many questions are we not going to answer?
Yeah. So supposedly regulation is supposed to protect consumers from, toxic food or unsafe practices or whatever. In actuality, what regulation actually does is two things. Firstly, it protects the incumbents or the established importers, producers, whatever, from competition. Mm-hmm. And the second thing it does is basically help to crush political rivals. And I'll speak about Elon Musk in a second because it's connected to him. And the third one is it's a great way to get bribes. Right? Because if you're sitting in the Institute of Standards and someone wants to import a machine or anything, and it's important for them, and you can find 10,000 excuses why you can't release the product to their own, owner and businessman, then that businessman or business person, I should probably say, is going to find it a lot easier and wiser to simply slip you an envelope with 5,000 shekels and there you go. So it's a great system getting bribes to...
So you have a lot of experience with this, I understand. with bribes.
Well, in Israel, it's not a secret.
I know,
Almost
I know.
anyone that tries to, for instance, build a house
Yeah.
needs to bribe someone along the way. Otherwise, it's going to take 2 decades before you get the permit. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not by much.
I know. I built a house. You were
Yeah,
there.
okay. So let's not talk about that because you probably don't want to say anything that you're going to regret later.
I wouldn't even know how to bribe him in America.
Look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk said, he told a story a few days ago, I think in one of his rallies in Pennsylvania, that when he was developing SpaceX, I think it was NASA, demanded that he does a study of the potential damage that bringing back the rockets to our planet is going to harm
Whales.
sharks and whales.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which is, of course, the dumbest thing you can think
I thought
about.
I thought when I saw that it was just like a parody.
No, of course.
I know. You were thinking I was like,
and I think that it's probably motivated by political considerations.
But I can prove it,
and
by the way.
possibly by sheer stupidity.
because one of the things that I despise is my wife's a big birder, and Israel, because where we're located, we're a huge migration route from Europe and Asia to Africa, and they build these ridiculous, ugly windmills by the Golan and in Gilboa in northern Israel, and they barely do anything for energy, and they kill so many beautiful God's creatures in the way.
Yeah.
Now, if they really cared about animals here, but they don't there, because their agenda here is to push the UN Paris
Wind
Accords.
turbines are a curse on natural
On
life.
their-
It's amazing.
I know, and
It's
the-
amazing.
and on whales actually, they piss off whales too when they're off the coast in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So they choose that they do when they do, So I think what's hard for people to understand is when you say, it sounds almost conspiratorial, right? Because as an individual, one of the things, there's this government organization with some very blah name that is run by, there's 1,000 people working there, and they're going to set these rules so they can get bribes. They're coming together. It sounds like you sound crazy, right? How do you make it make sense? Like in practice, what actually happens in these organizations that they overregulate and make your life miserable so they can profit themselves or help themselves politically?
It shouldn't sound crazy to Israelis or to anyone who lives in a regime or in a country where regulation is very burdensome.
That's a good
because
point.
everyone experiences it.
Right.
As I said, it's
Right.
very tough to build a
Right.
house in Israel without bribing someone. And a lot of people are building houses and apartments in Israel, so many people go through the same experience. But also you need to remember that it's easy to compare different countries and different regulatory regimes. Israel, according to measurements done by international bodies that compare different countries and different regimes, or whatever,
That are also regulated and corrupt.
is suffering for one of the most burdensome regulatory regimes in the developed world.
Right.
Possibly the worst. Well, maybe not the worst, but certainly one of the worst. Denmark,
Right.
who's considered by many in Israel as some kind of a socialistic paradise, is the third least regulated economy in the world.
Right.
And still Danes aren't dying daily from
They're also,
bad
I think, the
food.
top of the happiness,
Plants aren't going up in flames, buildings aren't crashing down in Denmark. Still, they somehow manage to have a semi-prosperous economy with the type of regulations that are hugely less burdensome than the ones we have in Israel. So as a politician, what I'm saying is, why can't we have the same regime that Denmark has? I mean, it's working greatly for them, why not for us? And the least regulated economy in the world is Hong Kong, which up until 4 or 5 years ago was, actually still is, maybe the richest country in the world, extremely free, a very attractive immigration destination. And yeah, if they can do it, why can't us? Why does Israel need to be one of the worst countries in the world or in the developed world when it comes to regulations?
I have one of my contractors, Israeli from Parkour. He changed his. He travels sometimes and works a little digital nomad, and does some work for us. And then she's like, "Oh, I changed my legal entity to. You want to change it to Hong Kong?" And I told him I'm not paying you in Hong Kong. I'm not, because it's got China. I was like, sorry.
Okay.
So he then changed to Singapore. But it was like, so I knew why, but I asked him, and he was like, yeah, I don't pay the taxes, and like, it's just ridiculous. I'm saying, why should I? And here in the end now, Israel's going to collect 0 taxes.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of collecting some but less. And so people forget I think Israelis, and this might be true for every nation in a sense, is that we're very inward looking in a way.
Yeah.
And so we only see competition within one another, but we don't understand we're actually competing globally all the time. We just may not see that.
So, okay, you mentioned banks in Israel. So that's a good example also when it comes to regulatory burdens, the regulatory framework, competition between countries, and the nature of the regime. Just to explain to people that don't know, we have basically about 4 large banks in Israel. They control something like 95% of the market. Whatever, it's about 95%. And we haven't had a new large bank in Israel for more than 50 or 60 years. And it's not illegal per se to open up a bank in Israel, but the regulatory demands are so stringent that in actuality, it's impossible. So that's why banks in Israel are extremely inefficient, because competition is almost doesn't exist. And when you speak about competition with other countries, startups in Israel find it extremely hard to raise money and move it into Israel and put it and deposit in their banking account, because the bank demands to know where the money is coming from, and the bank simply assumes that you're a criminal and the person that invested in your company is just laundering money. They just assume that. And you basically have to start from a position where you're the criminal, your investor is a criminal, your company is a criminal organization, and you need to prove otherwise. Other it being completely the opposite, which you're a normal person, you're an entrepreneur, this guy's an investor, he's giving you money. If you guys think I'm a criminal, please prove it.
Right. That goes, by the way, just back to the freedom argument, and in a judicial system, well, I mean, you're innocent until proven otherwise.
Exactly.
Which also in general people don't seem to do here too. But,
yeah, exactly. So, and especially now when the situation in Israel has been becoming over the past few years, and certainly over the last year, more and more challenging. Now it's important more than ever to be cognizant of the fact that we're competing with many other countries, and we need to be a lot better. Firstly, because we're competing, but also because we are running the risk of entrepreneurs living in Israel and moving to greener pastures. So, and especially now, Trump winning the elections is fantastic for us. It's fantastic in my opinion, right? Obviously. Fantastic for the US, fantastic for the world, fantastic for us. The one risk that's coming from Trump is that he's likely to make the US a lot better. The business environment in Israel is going to improve, maybe dramatically, if he's successful in, enacting his policies. And that's going to make competition from the point of view of Israel a lot more challenging, because then the incentive for entrepreneurs to open up shop in the US rather than Israel goes up. And that's a risk.
So fascinating, you're saying a Trump presidency, which would be great for the economy in the United States, will have huge residual effects here. Because I saw more than since October 7th, which hasn't been great for the economy, but the tech ecosystem, which we're here representing and serving, really took a hit started in May 2022, when inflation started to really hit. Between May through the end of 2022, and things got cheaper. The burn rate for these startups that weren't yet cash flow positive, let alone ROI positive, their money needed to last longer. They were saying they're not going to get more funding anytime soon. The Biden-Harris administration were anti-IPO, M&A, anti-business, heavy regulation. So that's going to liberate the American economy.
Right.
And through that, we'll have residual effects, probably directly, because we're heavy tech dependent. We're going to do much better. However, that being said, if things now are so much more attractive in America economically, we can see a chance that Israelis, we may get a little bit of a brain drain, while some of them may go jump to America to go do business. Yeah. And therefore losing their economic power and spend here.
Yeah. So look, for me personally, it's been an ongoing theme for a few years, the risks of Israelis leaving Israel, immigrating outside or doing Yerida, as we call it in Israel. And the reason is that Israel, to a large degree, is dependent on the tech sector. Just like you said a few minutes ago, 60% of exports is tech. Tech employs something like 300,000 people with wages are much higher than average. It's an extremely critical, important sector for Israel. The reason we can import so much stuff is because the Israeli shekel is strong. The reason the Israeli shekel is strong is because of exports, mainly because of exports, and that's tech. So it's critical for the Israeli economy. So in my eyes, the number one risk facing Israel as a whole, the economy, the state, whatever, is the weakening of the tech sector. And specifically, the number one factor that could derail the sector is people leaving Israel. And over the last year, it's become, for me at least, something that needs to be discussed constantly, because the implications, if the risk actually materializes, is huge. Because tech entrepreneurs and tech engineers can leave Israel to other countries extremely easily, right? Usually immigrants have difficulties in finding jobs, finding apartments, finding education, institutions for their kids, whatever. But with the tech sector, their skills are so much sought after everywhere that you can imagine that the companies that hire them and the headhunters that manage the process are going to basically pull them into their own, whatever they want to, whatever the company that's hiring them is going to pay them high, salaries that are at least as high as they got paid in Israel. They're going to take care of schools for the kids, and they're going to take care of their, apartments, whatever. And they're going to live in an area that is physically, possibly a lot more safer than living in Israel. Taxes are going to be possibly a lot lower than in Israel. The cost of living is most surely going to be a lot lower than it is in Israel, because Israel is an extremely expensive country, 100% fault of government policies. So you have all of these things coming together, and of course on the background of what's been happening over the past year with the war and deteriorating security and also the need of the government to raise a lot more taxes over the next few years, all of this is creating a situation where you have an increasing risk of people leaving Israel. And Trump, again, winning the elections in the US and possibly turning the US into a much more attractive destination, is just magnifying the situation and making reforms that much more critical.
Is it possible for us to be able to do something for just the political structure system, not politicians per se, but to be able to bring sort of reforms that maybe come to America or that happen with Milei in Argentina to Israel? Or is it because we're parliament and getting a majority, you're always, even if you have a strict capitalist, even if you have a capitalist prime minister, a free market prime minister that wants to liberate the economy, they still would have to get in government with protectionists or socialists?
Yeah, so the only reason I'm in politics is because I believe there's but there is an actual path to reform that could be successful in Israel. You could actually make it.
Why don't you talk about that?
Yes. So
what kind of reforms, so that people can know? What kind of reforms can people do now in order that we can do now to make people freer and more prosperous?
The number one reform that needs to be done in Israel is to deregulate the economy. That's the most important thing. We have 500...
Do you want to get some regulations that people can relate to, and then they can directly see in the pricing? Whether it's pineapple, tea, there's so many examples, cribs.
Yeah.
These are all things that are more expensive than they should be.
So maybe the most obvious place to start is with the food market in Israel, which is extremely regulated from two sides. Firstly, if you look at the local farms market, the production of eggs and meat and dairy products, this is all managed by the state, the same level that the Soviet Union managed its own economy. You have specific governmental entities that manage this entire market. They decide on who produces milk, what prices, who do you sell it to, what type of milk can you produce, and some of the prices are under, they're fixed or under some kind of price control. And then you also have another type of central planning of this market that's coming from imports. Some products are simply can't be imported into Israel, like oranges, lemons, avocados, and other stuff. And some other products are under such heavy regulations that you can't import it even if you like. So maybe that's the first place to start, because that's a big factor that contributes into the cost of living in Israel. And food, especially food, damages especially the lower, the poorest part of the population, because they spend disproportionate sum of money on food, or disproportionate part of their income on food. So that's maybe where you want to start. And politically, it's very possible in Israel. Firstly, because there's an overall public recognition that it has to be done. And secondly, because politically it's possible because of the way politics in Israel work. The way you form governments in Israel is you build a coalition. The coalition is made up of a number of parties. The largest party and then some small satellites. But the larger party, usually the Likud, has been over the past 20 years or so, the Likud needs the support of the smaller parties. And without all of the smaller parties that are some kind of, let's call it natural partners of the ruling party, you can't have a coalition. So it's absolutely critical for them to get the support of the smaller party.
So a smaller party can leverage their power in order to get.
If you get into parliament or Knesset with a small party, but is a very coherent ideological party, that its entire promise to its voters is to enact political reforms for the economy, capitalistic reform, libertarian reforms, and then that small party can insist on one or two reforms that can completely change the economy. The ruling party will have to comply, otherwise you won't participate in the coalition, and then they can't rule the country. And then you do those reforms. The reforms are going to be extremely successful because all capitalistic reforms are always extremely successful, and I'm not exaggerating. And then in the next election cycle, you're going to get more capital, more political capital from your previous successes. You're going to get even more votes, and you're going to be able to pass even more reforms. And that's just a very powerful, positive feedback loop that's going to get you more and more power and make the country more and more prosperous. And that's something
until people get too prosperous, then the socialists come in and they want to regulate.
Yeah, of course. That's always,
you're forgetting the whole cycle.
Yeah, that's always possible. But the point is that the one big obstacle is obviously to get that small libertarian party into parliament. But once you do that, then the sky's the limit.
Right. So you said, you can do one or two reforms that would radically liberate the economy. Can you give me an example of what one or two of these reforms would be?
So firstly, like I said, to deregulate the entire economy. I spoke about the food market. So, abolish all tariffs, abolish all import limitations, disband all of the government entities that manage the market. Let farmers do whatever they want. Let them grow whatever they want. Sell it to whoever they want and whatever price they choose. And let importers import whatever they want. In the food market, but everywhere else. I mentioned earlier that cosmeticians that can't import a nail polishing machine because of some stupid corrupt regulations. Abolish all of those regulations.
But I'll give you an example. I left my laptop at a layover in Madrid airport, terrible airport. And to get it sent back here, not to mention what a headache it was. Now, that's not related to Israel, that's them. Mm-hmm. They made me pay a $200 tariff. FedEx charged my car that they didn't order, it was international. I was like, what? This is my laptop. It's not in a box. Mm-hmm. My charger's not with it. It's got my stickers on it. And of course, when I got it, it was broken, which made me all more angry. Okay. It's been for shipping and tariffs, and then all that, it was broken the whole time. And it was insane. Why am I paying this thing I already owe? And then there's no way to appeal it or to do anything. It's just like,
So why is there a tariff on a laptop? I mean, we don't make the laptops in Israel. So you don't even have the excuse of protecting.
Yeah, but I already paid the tariff on it when I bought it here. Now I'm paying a tariff on it.
Yeah, of course. I mean that's extra stupid. I'm just saying to begin with, why do we have tariffs on electronics? We don't make any electronics in Israel, and the only reason.
If we did, would you support tariffs?
No, of course not.
I'm
just saying there's no.
There isn't even a protectionist argument.
Yeah. There's not even the argument of you're raising a lot of funds because we need tax revenues.
Same with car taxes.
To whatever. The entire revenues being collected by tariffs in Israel is something like 2 or 3 billion shekels or whatever, a very small number that has no significance from a national accounts level. So why do you do that? Inertia, bad politicians, someone is bribing someone for some reason I can't even imagine right now. There's absolutely no reason to have tariffs on stuff that isn't made here. There's also absolutely no reason to have tariffs on stuff that is made here,
right?
Because you get much more efficiency and prosperity and higher wages and higher economic productivity. We don't have protections from anything. I'm just saying, at least then you have the excuse of, oh, we want to protect this and that. But with laptops, what are you protecting?
So let's bring it back to tech. Are there any regulations that would be good for the tech ecosystem at all?
Look, I'm sure that if I try to think hard enough, then maybe I can imagine something that is actually useful to the tech industry. But that's a slippery slope.
No. Okay.
The second you open the door to the idea of regulations, then 2 minutes after that, you're going to have a flood of corrupt, detrimental regulations. And even if you have good intentions, and people usually don't, especially politicians and regulators.
Like you.
but I'm the exception.
Of course, everyone is, right?
I'm so special. I'm so special.
It's like in America, Congress is like an approval rating of like 8%. But like, do you like your congressman? It's like 45% approval. What do you think of Congress in general?
Even if you have good intentions, you need to be smart enough to know what good, which regulations are good and which ones are bad.
Well, they don't know.
And people usually don't know that.
They don't know what the spillover effect is,
unless
right?
you have divine insight, there's just no way to know stuff like that in advance.
No, I'll lend you my kippah. So let's bring it to the government and the military, which is part of the government, and universities, which are subsidized by the government. There seems to be, and I touched on this earlier, like some kind of connection between them. A lot of cyber entrepreneurs come out of the military. The government wants to encourage that because they understand it's the golden goose that lays the golden eggs, or the goose lays the golden eggs, whatever it's called.
It's the goose that
lays the golden eggs. Okay, so we don't want to kill that goose.
No, we don't want to kill the goose. We do want the eggs.
And I think even the government, most of the government understands that or respects that. Is there any way, do you think like the government has been supportive for the tech ecosystem? Like how did it grow? Like we were a third world country 30 years ago, maybe less.
Right.
Literally, now we're a developing country. Compared to the rest of the world, it might soon be a first world country just because they're sucking. What does it look like? How does that happen? How did the tech ecosystem come to be? Because the government was involved.
Yeah, so firstly, I want to start with the question that you didn't ask, but it's kind of part.
Do you want to tell me to ask it?
Yeah.
I tell me what to ask.
I'll tell you what your question is. You won't even have to ask it.
Oh, perfect.
The question that you want to ask is, why is the government being so smart with the tech industry? Why are they being so understanding of the needs of the tech industry, and why aren't they levying the same type of regulations that they levy on other sectors? And the reason
Thank you. We're going to put you sitting here, we're going to do that, and we'll have a mirror of you interviewing yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So the answer to that is that politicians might be evil, but they're not stupid, or at least most of them. And you don't want to bully the industry that can flee the country. Right? You want to make sure that whoever you bully can't run away. So if, for example, you have a company that mines potash or gold or anything, you can do whatever you want with them because they can't take the money with them.
Because the mine is there.
But if it's a tech industry, if it's a tech company, they can leave the country within a fortnight.
Right.
And then what do you do?
Right.
So you make sure you make sure you be nice to them. Right. So this is why the state of Israel doesn't really regulate the sector right now, because they're afraid of them leaving.
Is there any way for the government to say, to expand that into other industries?
What, the not levying to deregulate other sectors?
Yeah.
Of course, they can do it immediately.
No, do you think they're is there any industries that would be incentivized like that? Hey, it might be good, we don't want to lose that, or maybe we can onshore an industry that we wouldn't have otherwise if we deregulate, like finance?
I think the reasons for the government or the motivation could be that the economy is doing so badly that you get to a point where you don't have a choice. And to prevent meltdown or recession or whatever, you start to deregulate. It could also happen, just like I described earlier, that you have a party that goes into parliament and that's everything they care about. And then their condition for joining the coalition is to deregulate the economy, then you deregulate the economy. But politicians or the state in general, out of their own goodwill, almost never does anything good.
So is there anything that they can do to support the tech industry?
Well, look, historically, what they have been doing is to charge very low rates of corporate tax, right? And
right.
That was helpful.
And payroll tax.
Yeah. I mean, specifically corporate tax. But the problem is that when they do that, they discriminate against other sectors in the Israeli economy. And that's bad. It's not the role of government to choose winners and losers. And it doesn't make sense for the government to decide.
But I don't think I think a lot of Israelis wouldn't agree with that sentiment.
Sorry, who wouldn't?
A lot of Israelis would say, we think the government should choose the winners or losers, or how we should prioritize our budget or our resources.
Well, that's why I'm not the finance minister right now, because that's what many Israelis think. If many Israelis thought what I think, then I should have been the finance minister right now.
Well, that's why all of Israel is going to watch this.
Right now. Yeah, so the government doesn't, it's not the role to choose winners and losers. It's not the role to choose anything, to be honest. The only role of government should be to protect our property rights. So that's maybe a topic for another discussion. My point is that once you charge lower corporate taxes from the tech industry, you're discriminating against other sectors. You're retarding the development of other sectors, and you're also running the risk of some sector becoming the most dominant sector globally over the next, let's say, 20 years, just like the tech industry did 40 years ago. And because you're discriminating against other sectors and regulating them and taxing them to death, you're basically preventing the development of that new sector that right now you can't even imagine.
The basic socialism, right? Yeah. In a sense, it's redistributing success. It's unfair. Yeah, it reminds me when my daughters argue. Yeah. It's not fair. She got this, I didn't.
Okay. I don't know how to solve that problem that you have in your
Neither
own
do
household. But I do know that politicians just shouldn't decide on stuff like that. So the solution to the discrimination in terms of corporate tax rate between tech industry and other industries in Israel is obviously not to raise the tax rate on the tech industry, but to lower everyone else's tax rate to the level of the tax industry, of the tech industry.
So
and that, of course, creates a problem in terms of tax revenues.
That's what I'm going to ask, right?
Yeah. So, and the solution to that is, of course, cutting budget.
But do you, okay, what about the theory that, let's put spending aside for a moment, cutting taxes, not immediately, there will be a shortcoming in tax income, but it will stimulate the economy, there'll be more profits, and then you'll get more revenue from that.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on, would you say that's true? Is that relevant to the Israeli economy?
Yeah, so that's of course called the Laffer curve, right? After Arthur Laffer.
Maybe you want to explain what the Laffer curve is?
Yeah, so if the tax rate is zero, what the tax rate is going to be?
You're going to get zero, right. You're going to click zero.
If the tax rate is 100%, how much tax
no one's going to report any income, so it's zero.
So the theory is that as you raise the tax rate, you're going to get more and more revenues. And then you get to the peak, and then as you increase the tax rate even more, tax revenues are going to come down because the tax rate is so high that it actually
encourages the black market or people not working.
Well, it damages economic activity.
Right.
At some stage, tax rate is so high, it just doesn't make sense to invest into.
Right. And by the way, also for people that are on welfare, Bituach Leumi, there are many I know that are that would like to join the workforce legally because that was good for their career, but they're like, well, now we lose all these benefits. It's more economical. Instead of me paying taxes, let me take from the system instead of participating. Correct. And so we're really hurting a lot of also demographics that would like to get into employment, but the government doesn't even let's say, creating or things like that. They don't make it economically feasible for them to.
Correct. Now, with the corporate tax, the idea of the Laffer curve makes a lot of sense because corporate tax truly determines how much you invest and where you invest. With income tax, it works a little bit less because you have to work, but you don't have to invest.
Right.
If you're an entrepreneur, you can be an entrepreneur in many, many places, and you choose a domicile that taxes you the least. So the idea of corporate tax rate and the idea of as you tax less, you actually get more revenues, actually does work, often. But when it comes to the corporate tax rate, yes, it's possible that you lower the tax and you get even more revenues. I don't know how to prove something like that beforehand. I think it's impossible. But my point is that cutting budget or cutting spending is good anyway. Even if you don't have a problem with the budget deficit, even if you don't think about the Laffer curve, you want to cut spending anyway because when the government spends money, it spends our money, right? Government doesn't have their own funds. Whatever money they do have, they get from us. And if they spend less, it means it takes less money from us. It means we're left with more money. So it's always good, which is why government needs to limit themselves to stuff that they have to do, right? To their obvious role in life, which is national securities, courts, law and order, stuff like that. Protecting our properties, right? That's what they need to do. Usually everything they do more than that is just damaging our life, hurting our the quality of life and whatever. A good example in Israel is the army and then the education system. The army is obviously a state monopoly, which of course why it's doing so badly, right? Every state monopoly operates extremely inefficiently. It doesn't really care about the customers, which is us basically. It's a state monopoly. They care about their own employees, they care about other stuff. Now, the problem with the army is that it's a problem without a solution. Because it's very tough to find a model where you have competing armies, both of them working, for you. I don't know how you can do something like that.
We have a lot of deregulation before we get there. We've other
Yeah.
lower hanging fruit.
We have much bigger problems and easier problems to solve beforehand. But for instance, with the education system, you can very easily imagine how you can do it without the government. Because you can have competing schools. For example,
people have them in private schools. People have that with a gun. We have it now. Why can't that extend to higher education?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if you want to go into that right now, because that's not exactly the topic of the discussion. But my point is that Israel spends something like 600 billion shekels. That's the government budget, more or less. It's an extremely inefficient country, right? We know that. We know that government is extremely inefficient. We know.
Do we?
Sorry?
Do we? Because I've seen people always saying more government, more government. We need to pay for this. We need to pay for kids' kindergarten. We need for them to do that. The government's responsible for Hamas holding hostages.
Even
the government, you know what I mean? They blame the government for everything.
The cognitive dissonance with many of those people is that if you ask them what they think about the services that government provides right now, like schools and others, they would say, oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, I know. I love that.
And then what's the solution?
Right.
Oh, they need to do more than that.
Right.
More than that. Okay.
So how stupid
That's
are we?
why politicians like me exist, to try to explain why it doesn't work. The point is that when you cut spending, the government does less. Whatever the government does is usually done in a poor way. It's much better to leave almost everything to the purview of the private sector. We're going to be left with more money. And therefore, you don't really need special excuses to explain why government needs to cut spending. The point I was making is that if the budget is 600 billion shekels or thereabouts, and we know that Israel or the government is very inefficient, usually quite corrupt, I can't imagine why the Israeli government can't cut, say, 10% of the budget and we won't even feel the impact, right? You can cut 60 billion shekels easily. We won't even see the impact because government services are simply going to continue to be very, very poor, just like they were before. But we're going to have less 60 billion shekels as a burden on all of us. Which is why I think it's supposed to be technically easy to cut spendings in Israel significantly. But you need to have political will for that, and we don't have that political will.
I think we don't have I think we have too much political ignorance or economic ignorance.
Well, you have. Okay, I don't want to go into names because we said that we won't mention names of politicians. But even politicians that make statements about how they're committed to the free market, and they understand the role of the entrepreneurs, and then they get into office and they're just as poor and as the minister that came before them. Mm-hmm. It's very depressing, actually.
Is it because they don't really believe what they say, or?
So firstly,
or like they believe it, but it's just, is the machine too hard?
It's not necessarily they don't believe what they say, they don't understand what they say. They don't actually.
So wait, how can you believe what you say without understanding it?
Oh, because you're surrounded by people that say, we're all Republicans and we believe in the free market. And then you think that you're also Republican and then you also believe in the free market, but you have no idea why you believe in the free market.
Right.
You just think it's fashionable to believe in the free market.
Right.
And or you come from.
Same people say that they're tolerant to the pro-democracy and then.
Yeah. Exactly. Democracy is good. What's democracy? I don't know.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly like that. So, firstly, they might think that the free market is good, but they don't understand. And then they go, they assume the roles. And then they go into the first meeting with the people that work in the office, in the ministry. And then the experts tell them, we need to increase spending in education by 5%. Otherwise, the level of education is going to plummet. And then, because you don't understand anything about the system, you don't understand about incentives, you don't understand about the actual advantages of competition, and then you listen to your experts. You don't want reports in the media later that say that you don't listen to the experts and you do whatever you want and you whatever. So you comply. You comply and you do exactly what the so-called experts tell you to do, and nothing changes. So the problems you have firstly is that whoever assumes the role, and again I won't mention names, doesn't actually understand how the free market works.
When you say the role for finance minister, you're talking about finance minister?
Yeah, I'm talking about the finance
minister. Finance minister.
Specifically, although it works in many other ministries.
Right.
Specifically the education system and the health ministry and others. So firstly, you don't understand. And secondly, it's not your role in life. It's not your aim in life. And that's a little bit harder to explain maybe. But if you come from a party that, let's say it's a religious party, it's a right-wing religious party, what your voters want you to do is to protect the settlements, say, in Judea and Samaria, right? This is what interests them. They want you to promote right-wing policies. They want you to be tough on defense. They want you to do this and that. They don't care about the economy. They didn't elect you to lower the cost of living. They didn't elect you to deregulate the economy.
Right. It's definitely not a priority. It's not a priority.
Yeah, it's not in your political interest to start to endanger your own political interest to achieve goals that your voters don't care about.
Right.
Which is
it's a waste of political capital. You're
exactly.
saying.
It's right. So this is one of the reasons, or a main reason, why. What I'm going to say now is a little bit self-serving, because I'm going to say anyway, which is that someone like me is exactly what you need, because I believe in capitalism, I understand capitalism, and my party, the Israeli Freedom Party, is 100% a libertarian capitalistic party. Anyone who is going to vote for us is going to vote for us specifically because we are a libertarian party.
Right.
And therefore, my obvious political interest is to do whatever I can to pass political...
Isn't it too narrow? I'm just saying, I care about it. I'm supportive. But I have many other interests that are not related to cost of living. Such as I want things to be family.
Let me ask and answer. I'll take over this entire interview.
Yeah, you want to hold the card?
Yeah. No, you can keep it, so you'll feel important. say that you really, really care about the army being a strong army that protect us from our enemies and what we've seen over the past year. That's a hugely important thing.
Right.
As if we didn't know that before.
Right.
But anyway, you need to have a very powerful army, right?
Right.
The only way to have a powerful army in Israel is to have a prosperous economy. Because only a prosperous
without a strong economy, no
can
strong
generate
defense.
enough tax revenues
For a strong
to
defense.
finance a very large army. The only way to have a prosperous economy is to have a capitalistic system.
Right.
There's no other way. The human species has not found a way over the past, I don't know how many thousands of years, to have economic prosperity without capitalism. Okay, maybe if you if you have a huge amount of oil underground, okay, maybe. But that's what, 2 countries globally, 3 countries? Any normal country can't actually have prosperity without capitalism. Therefore, if you care about the defense of the Israeli state and you want a powerful IDF, you have to be capitalist.
Yeah, but the people don't see that because a lot of people will say, we need social cohesion and the army is part of everyone and we want it to be strong and therefore we want it to unify and bring the people together and that's better for defense. I'm playing devil's advocate here, right? Et cetera, and bring it for defense. So therefore, I want to have a strong army that's represented by people, right? And a diverse people and doing all kinds of things that may not directly be related to defense. What are your thoughts about that? Or it's good for social cohesion, or it's also good for people to learn a bunch of skills that people don't get in the rest of the free world when they're 18, which is definitely true. Even just the 2 months of personal training, even if you do nothing for the rest of 3 years.
I think what's good for social cohesion is to be alive and prosperous.
Why?
Because without being alive, you don't have any.
Well, of course, alive. But
Look, my point is.
I'm just saying the social cohesion. Is America capitalist relative to other nations?
Yeah.
Social cohesion is garbage. It's terrible.
Yeah, but
I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Look, Switzerland is the most capitalist country in Europe, and it's very socially cohesive.
Yeah.
I mean, look. You have different cultures. And
so that's what I'm saying.
My point is that if you look at Israel specifically,
yes,
social cohesion or the problems with social cohesion in Israel that stem from the army comes from the point or from the problem is that you have big demographic groups inside Israel that don't join the army.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with the economic system. That has everything to do with political tug of war, political power, stuff that we might not want to go into right now. But it's not the economic regime; it's the political situation. And of course, it's something that needs to be solved, but not because of less capitalism or more capitalism. If you want to look at demographics in a way that connects better to capitalism, you probably want to look at the ultra-Orthodox element in the Israeli population. Completely, regardless of what's happening with the army. These guys or this sector they don't pay taxes, or they don't pay taxes anywhere close to the type of support they get from the state when it comes to education, infrastructure, healthcare, all of those issues. So, 10, 20, 30 years from now, you're going to get something like 50% of the population getting very low quality education, not being really part of the workforce, not contributing enough to the productivity of the economy. And that's going to be a huge problem.
Right.
But going back to the point
I don't think we'll get there.
Sorry?
I don't think we'll get to that.
Because we're going to have to solve it before.
I think everyone's aware of it's not everyone's aware of the problem, including the populations that are underrepresented.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
It's going to be fixed.
But if you speak about social cohesion as more of a general term, then you do have studies that compare different countries and different economic systems, and it's very clear based on those studies that countries that are characterized by a market economy, meaning they're capitalistic countries, social cohesion is much better than in countries that are more centrally planned.
Right.
And when I mean, for example,
Is that because when you're central planned, you only hire people that are like you and similar, and your friends, and there's like nepotism in a sense, and
yes,
that kind of corruption of
that's
instead of
it.
opening it to who might be the best economical, might be someone that doesn't come from a good economic background and isn't as incorporated to the workforce.
Yeah.
Now you build them into the workforce, and they can build a career accordingly.
Yeah, sure. So if you look at market economies, philanthropy is a lot more, popular and generous than in countries that are characterized by central planning. And if you also, social mobility is much better in capitalistic countries, which is maybe understandable, but still it's interesting to see that, many people blame capitalism for, they're basically putting the label of peak capitalist, right? Because they just imagine that people are hostile to each other and people are stealing from each other, and the only way to become richer and amass wealth is to steal it from someone else.
There's the anti-Semitic left. If Israel's succeeding, so they must be treating their Arab neighbors poorly.
There's a very interesting similarities between anti-Semitism and anti-capitalistic sentiments. But my point is that in actuality, if you want to find better people that donate money, people that are trusting of each other, people that cooperate with each other, you usually find it in capitalistic countries, not in socialistic/central planning regimes. So if you're looking for social cohesion in Israel, in order to increase social cohesion, then make sure that everyone gets an opportunity, that people don't steal from each other, that the government doesn't do favors to people that have good political connections, that if you open up a business, you don't spend 90% of your time dealing with idiotic regulations and dealing with oppressive regulators and paying taxes for stuff you actually didn't do and didn't earn. Just make the system much more fair. A free system is a fair system, and a fair system increases social cohesion and increases, I think, also well-being. I mean, especially lately, I've been hearing more and more of people that want to leave the country. And the number one reason they give is it's so tough to live here, everything's so expensive, we're paying so much taxes, dealing with government is so terrible. This is something you have to solve. And you have to solve by enacting, capitalistic reforms. It's just no other way. Yeah, I can talk about that more and more. But,
couldn't tell. Let's bring it back to the Israeli tech ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is there any space for, other than, let's say, cutting taxes, is there anything you think the government can do or not do or stop doing to further help the tech ecosystem?
Yes, I'm going to have to continue in the same vein. There's absolutely nothing the government can do or should do in terms of interfering with the industry itself. Even if it's, even if the intentions are good and you want to somehow help the industry and, help them with the subsidies of whatever, something you can imagine. I would strongly recommend against doing anything like that. Don't do anything. The only thing the government needs to do is to make the life of the people that work for the tech industry, either as entrepreneurs or as wage earners, make their lives easier.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? It means that whenever they go to the supermarket to buy food, everything is going to be cheaper.
The big one's housing.
Better, and you're going to have a much better selection of food, maybe like the stuff you find in Western Europe and in the US. Make sure that the schools the kids go to aren't horrible schools, violent, that the level of education is one of the poorest in the Western world. And then you, as a parent, needs to invest in private tutors to compensate for the very poor education your kid is getting in school. Make sure that doesn't happen. Make sure that when you, as a wage earner in the tech industry, want to buy a house, that you can buy your house in a place that we actually want to buy a house, right? And you don't have to take up a mortgage that basically enslaves your entire life because the real estate is so expensive in Israel. That's what you as a government need to do in order to have the tech industry, which is help the people, make their life easier, make the cost of living lower, make apartments better and cheaper. Maybe deal with the traffic jams. Traffic in Israel is terrible.
Oh my God.
That's also something you can take care of.
By the way, since you're anti-regulation,
Right.
What do you think about this regulation? All right. I go in a big shopping center. There's a chain of shopping centers called Big, or even large malls by me, Ain Shemer and Karkora. Right? They're big outdoor mall. One lane for cars to come in, one lane for car to come out. The number of parking spots, not a lot. Then you get a regulation. How many square meters of parking? How many parking things? For how many square meters of parking spots? How many entrances?
Exits? Right there.
Because in a sense, there's such a shortage that people are willing to suffer. Also, shitty building. There's such a shortage that people are so desperate to get in. I don't care if it's on the road and there's a good thing. I don't care if it's 10 houses on top of each other like a South African slum. Is there any good regulation there, you think?
The only good regulation...
If you couldn't tell, parking is a pet peeve of mine.
The only good regulation you can apply in such a situation is to basically abolish all of the existing regulations. If you want to open up a supermarket, big, whatever, just do it in whatever way you choose. You buy the land and you do whatever you want. Now, if you open up a big shopping mall, what do you want to do first and foremost? Make sure that you have ample parking.
Correct.
How do you do that? You build a lot of stories downstairs. You buy a bigger plot of land. And then you can do it as long as you don't have regulations that prevent you from developing that plot of land in any way that you choose, that you think is going to make your business more prosperous. You don't need regulations for that. You need exactly the opposite. No regulations. Just the second you buy a plot of land, do whatever you want with it. And then you, as a business
so then why aren't
you going to have the
But
interest?
They already have the interest now, and they don't do it. It's usually one lane in and out. The traffic just to go into these shopping centers is insane.
But that's because they
universal.
can't build it in the way that they choose, because you have existing regulations that prevent them from designing that place in a way that they choose. And another problem is that you have a lot of, how should I say that, stress on whatever exists right now in terms of shopping malls, because it's almost impossible to build a new shopping mall, right? A lot of the construction that you see in Tel Aviv right now, all of the tall buildings and skyscrapers, and it all looks so impressive, these are all constructions that go back to permits that were submitted 30 years ago.
Oh, God.
You're seeing now stuff that started 30 years ago.
And the Empire State Building.
And the reason it took 30 years is because of regulations.
Right.
You want people to go into, I don't know, see a land that they like, make sure that it's free, it's not owned by someone else, buy it, get the permit, build it, and open it, everything within a year and a half.
And it'll bring down prices.
At the moment
all
in
that
Israel, it's 20 years.
And all that expense and risk about waiting 20 years.
Yeah.
And the regulation,
Exactly.
all that gets passed on
You're
to the
going to
end
be
user, which gets passed on to the consumer, into the prices, because it goes up on their rent.
Exactly. You're going to be able to offer the same type of products at 20% less in terms of price, just because you don't have to spend so much money on dealing with the regulations. Regulations are poison. They're toxic. They're not protecting our interests. They're not doing almost anything good. There's always some basic level of regulations that you might deem necessary, right? Maybe the same stuff that exists in Hong Kong or in Denmark. But beyond that level, basic level of, let's say, safety regulations, everything else is just BS. Everything else can be just chucked. You don't need it.
So what can we do going forward before we wrap up to help the Israeli tech ecosystem really take over? Like to go from being one of the top three to the top one, to compete with Silicon Valley, especially in that. How can we compete?
I'll give you an honest answer, although it's again going to sound very self-serving.
Yes.
Donate money to my party.
Okay, now
You need libertarian politicians.
But what policies or what things can the government do specifically in relation to help the tech be more competitive? Or is it just in general liberating the economy? And the tech ecosystem is already relatively liberated, and it's about liberating the economy and regulation at large.
Set fire to the regulations book in Israel.
Set fire to what, the regulations book?
Yeah.
I saw this Babylon Bee thing. It said Ron Paul puts a Nike sign over the Federal Reserve, so rioters would think it's Nike store and burn it down.
Absolutely. Of course, the Fed operates online, so it's not going to help, but I at least get the sentiment. Yeah, my point is, bring down the regulatory level in Israel to that of Hong Kong, and the economy is going to be super dramatic, significant, better. Super. I mean, the impact is going to be huge because it's like taking a noose off your head, of your neck.
Yeah.
You can start breathing.
Right.
And you do have 500,000 business owners in Israel that are now suffering under the weight of regulations and taxes. And if you want to make sure that they prosper and we prosper and the country prosper, and not only that we don't get Jews leaving Israel, but actually get Jews immigrating to Israel from the West, there's only one way to do it. There's only one way. You have to have capitalism. Mm-hmm. Again, I think I've said it like half an hour ago, but the human species hasn't found a way to reach prosperity without freedom. There's just no way.
Do you think, I hear that. No, yeah, and I think you're right. Are you optimistic, let's say, assuming that we get the welfare issue solved and just in general, do you think we'll be in a better place economically 10, 20 years? Like, we have a lot of education to do and a lot of things like that. Do you think, are you optimistic? Of course, there are some negative trends, there are positive trends, but I just want to know how do you feel about us economically?
If we continue the way we are right now, Israel won't exist.
Nothing won't continue. Nothing won't continue. I don't believe that.
Yeah, but I'm saying
nothing continues as is.
I want to paint a very stark picture because I think the situation is
it continues until it can't.
Yeah.
Like everything else.
You always run the risk of continuing the way you continue right now, assuming that if things go very badly, you can correct. That's not always the case. If, for instance, things continue to deteriorate and you have a huge immigration or immigration outside of Israel, of the tech sector leaving to Eastern Europe and the US, you might get to a situation where most people that are smart and have entrepreneurial spirit no longer reside in Israel. And then it almost doesn't matter what you do, the country is lost. Because you don't have the people that can rebuild the economy.
No, I understand that. I don't think things are going to continue as they are.
I'm just saying, you can say that the chances of that are low or high. I'm just saying it's a matter of fact, as much as you can predict stuff like that. If we continue the way we are, Israel won't exist 20 years from now because we won't be rich enough to finance the army.
Yeah.
However, if we do enact the necessary reform, Israel is going to be the richest country in the world 10 years from now.
Right, that's how I feel. 10 years from now. Yeah, I know, it's that fast.
It's amazing.
Especially, it's so what we have going for us is the birth rate. Jews have kids. The Jewish woman is the only population in the world that has more kids than her mother.
Yeah.
Is that amazing? Including not just religious, secular too. They also have a positive growth rate of like 25%.
So I have to say, one of the things we need to do is to stop encouraging birth rate. I'm sorry, that's kind of the opposite exactly what you said right now.
Oh, I'm all for them people getting more kids.
But for instance, in Israel, as you make more and more kids, you have, let's say, in your family 3 kids, you get 3 times benefit.
Right. Well, but
6 kids.
No, I understand that. That's a government problem. That's not a having kids problem.
Oh yeah, no, of course. I'm against encouraging.
You're against government being involved.
I'm against deterring people.
Got it. Right.
It's just not. It's none of your business.
Right.
Just like it's not the business of government to pick winners and losers. It's not the business of the government or the state to decide how many kids you should have. And I want to remind everyone, just so people maybe for people that aren't aware of the fact that the state or the country or the politicians or whatever, it's not some kind of a semi-divine entity that hovers from above and is filled with goodwill and clairvoyance, and they know exactly how we need to live our lives, and they can manage our life, then they just need to do a little bit better. No, all of these people, or many of them, okay, I won't use any derogatory terms, but let me just say that if you look at the politicians that are active in Israel right now, I think it's absolutely insane to want them to have more power over us. I mean, these are horrible people, and people in Israel, I think, grasp almost intuitively that these are horrible people.
But they still want to give them more power. So
this is a
maybe Israelis are horrible people.
To understand. Look, one of the reasons I want to enter parliament is not only because I want to pass reforms. but I just want to be able to go up on the podium in the Knesset and kind of educate the people.
Right.
That you need less of people, like me, politicians, right? Need less of that, not more of that. And I think that once people understand that politicians are poison and the state is poison, and the only good thing that actually happens in the country is the society itself, people, I mean, the second you understand that, you're halfway through to libertarianism.
Since IsraelTech is a media brand, what do you have to say about the media conglomerates? And it seems like everyone says the same thing, and you see this in America too. I see montages on X of every single news media saying the same garbage, whatever it is, don't go to Fiach, don't go to Fiach, don't go to Fiach, all of them. And I wonder where it comes from. It reminds me of America.
Yeah, I think this problem is beginning to fix itself and has been over the past 10 years
because of podcasts,
social media, of course. And then, of course, you had 2020 where social media went completely or almost completely Orwellian. And then, thankfully, Elon Musk came and basically saved the human race. And I think I'm not exaggerating by saying that Elon Musk saved us by buying Twitter. And I think this is what's going to save Israel, because if, let's say, 10 years ago, everyone in Israel was basically the victim of the education system and the mainstream media. And whatever those guys taught you was all wrong, right? That capitalism is bad, business people are all a bunch of thieves, and the ones that are saving you, the knight on the white horse, is the regulator and the politician that comes and they really want to, they want you to do well and they want to protect you from an evil business person. And because of social media, YouTube specifically, and maybe also Facebook and others, I think that trend is reversing, or at least the voices that try to explain why everything the state says is BS, those voices are getting a place to actually, they're getting a platform. And now, again, thanks to Elon Musk and Trump, I think that trend is going to become bigger. And I think in Israel specifically, over the past year or 2 years, you've seen an explosion of podcasts, right? That because we're always a few years behind the US. And if podcasts really blew up in the US 5 years ago, 3 years ago, now it's happening in Israel. And that's great news.
Right.
And this is great news. Because again, you hear, if you listen to journalists, the mainstream media in Israel over the past month, then you're going to think that Trump is Hitler and he's going to lose big time. Right. But if you look at X, and if you look at even privately owned betting sites, you knew that firstly, Trump is actually quite a smart and capable guy. And secondly, that he's going to win. I mean, I was surprised by the magnitude of his victory. I was completely expecting him to win, completely. I wasn't surprised, not because I'm that smart, but because I was following X and other social media.
You're following unfiltered, manipulated sources.
Yes.
And what's great about social media is that you can say something and then right there, especially on X where there isn't that. Someone can comment and people can disagree and they can repost another commentary and then they may make you look like an idiot or whatever.
It's fantastic.
It's
fantastic. It's a fantastic
so much fun.
System. It's almost self-correcting in that every time someone says something really stupid, in the comments, they make him know that he says something very stupid. So anyone in Israel, anyone that's listening to us, or anyone anywhere in the world right now that sits here, that listens to us, and then goes home and sits on the couch and watches TV, and he thinks that he's getting the truth, is delusional. Delusional. 95% of what we're getting from TV are either lies or either malicious lies or just lies born out of ignorance. If you want to listen to the truth, listen to social media, listen to podcasts, listen to YouTube.
Listen to IsraelTech.
Listen to me, of course, but don't listen to TV. I haven't watched
I agree. Cable TV.
I stopped watching TV like 20 years ago.
Yeah, I saw Israelis on X. They're debating between Channel 12 and Channel 14. I'm like, you guys are so pathetic. I was like, I'm still laughing at all of you. It's really funny.
Look, most political discourse is basically between parties that want to raise taxes by 5% and parties that want to raise taxes by 3%. If the ones
You're being generous.
If they want to raise taxes by 5%, they're crazy. They're communists. Let's rate them by 3%.
Well, that's not principle.
Yeah. So I'm saying let's just
Right.
cut taxes like crazy.
Right.
That's my position.
Well, if anyone thinks that we said anything here stupid, I'm sure you have, you can put in the comments below. That's why we're a social media first platform. So,
Yeah, exactly.
So we can put those debates there and bring the community together. Gilad Alper, thank you for everything you're doing for our tech ecosystem. Hopefully more people, for our economic system.
And also for the tech system.
And for the tech system.
Tech industry.
Which you talked about, and maybe another time we'll talk about it more. Good luck, and hopefully we can see a lot more freedom and prosperity, not just for Israeli tech, but for all of Am Yisrael. Thanks, Gilad.
Thank you very much.